Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of Exploring History, where we are continuing our exploration of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. In the last part of this series, episode 7 to be specific, we saw how the reign of one powerful king, Shalmanesar III, ended in a civil war that finally, with the help of the king's most powerful chief marshal, Dayan Ashur, brought about his chosen son, Shamshi-Adad V, to power. Now I say chosen son because Shalmanesar III actually had another son, an elder son, but for some reason he chose Shamshi-Adad V. We don't know exactly why, but that was his choice. The order was finally restored across the empire after the civil war, and commerce and campaigning resumed as in years prior. Politically, things had changed. Perhaps this was due to the aftermath of the civil war, in which both sides had relied on their supporters, with the victor, Shamshi-Adad V, becoming overly dependent on his supporters. This seems to have brought changes in the Assyrian power structure that brought about what some historians dub the rise of the Magnates, or a small group of powerful Assyrians, mostly field marshals, generals, and court officials whose power and influence superseded that of their title. This of course came at the expense of the Assyrian king. Okay, so now that we're pretty much caught up, let's start with some new material. Also, I apologize for the lack of images in this video. To be honest, there are not a lot of non-copywritten media out there that I could use for this video. The information though is legit. I did the research, so hopefully you'll enjoy that. So, getting back to our story. Under Shamsi-Adad V, who ruled from 823 to 811 BCE, many of these magnates began to keep their offices past the end of their appointed terms. One of these men was a field marshal named Yahalu. Another was Nergal-Ilaiya, a provincial governor who later would go on to also hold the rank of field marshal. It seems like this was a position that many Assyrians in the military or bureaucracy aspired to become. Such men were becoming indispensable to the king and the royal family. Whether Shamshi-Adad realized what was going on or not politically didn't halt the annual Assyrian campaigns against their enemies, most of whom the Assyrians had created due to their brutal history of aggression, conquest, and slaughter. Early inscriptions of Shamshi-Adad V report several campaigns in the mountains of western Iran and against a number of fortresses in Urartu. What's interesting is that not all of them were led by the king. In fact, several of them, if not the majority of them, were led by field marshals. Shamshi-Adad may have only personally led a few of them. One campaign even seems to have been led by Shamshi-Adad's chief eunuch. This is indeed strange for an Assyrian king to not lead his men into battle. It was almost a religious duty for him to do so. Despite all of the usual Assyrian bravado, historians seem to get the picture that many of these campaigns resulted in stalemates, with little, if any, gain in territory. Whether he personally led them or not, Shamshi-Adad's armies were defeated in the east against mountain tribes in the Zagros, and in the west in northern Syria. If there was no actual military defeat, at least it's clear that the people in northern Syria were withholding their annual tribute to the Assyrian king. It also appears that there was trouble in the Assyrian Heartland, where a rebellion broke out. The order was restored. Such an event took considerable resources to quell, and also showed that perhaps those areas that had rebelled against Shamshi-Adad and his father Shalmanesar III less than a decade earlier had not been entirely pacified. Towards the end of his reign, specifically the years 815 to 811 BCE, Shamshi-Adad's campaigns yielded more tangible results. When I say Shamshi-Adad's campaigns, these include the campaigns of his field marshals and generals as well, the ones that he personally didn't lead. Anyway, these later campaigns were directed against Babylonia and its king, Marduk-Balassu-Ikbi, along with his Aramaean, Chaldean, and even Elamite allies. Yes, I said Elamites, the same people who centuries before had wrecked Babylon and gone off with the city's holy statue of its patron deity, Marduk. Similar to the great coalition put together by Hadad-Ezer of Damascus decades before, this one seems to have brought together all of the important players to Assyria's south. So how did this come about? Well, during the civil war with his brother, Shamshi-Adad V had received help from his father's Babylonian puppet, Marduk-Zakir-Shumi I. Some kind of treaty had been signed between the two, the terms of which are currently unknown. It seems though that this treaty was a bit one-sided and gave the Assyrians, namely Shamshi-Adad, who was desperate for allies at the time, the short end of the stick. Whatever terms or concessions he'd agreed to, they were necessary at the time, but not ideal for the Assyrians, who were used to dictating terms to their southern neighbor, and not the other way around. In short, the treaty gave the Babylonians, though still vassals of the Assyrian Empire, more power than they had previously enjoyed. Marduk-Zakir-Shumi's son and successor, Marduk-Balassu-Ikbi, probably decided to extend the power given to him as much as possible. Thus, he made friends with others who were not so fond of the Assyrians, and simply assumed that both the treaty negotiated years before, as well as the perceived weakness of Shamshi-Adad, protected his actions. This turned out to be a big mistake. As we've seen so far with the history between the two, any time that the Assyrians felt that Babylonia was overstepping its bounds, they sought to rectify the situation by bringing their southern neighbor back in line. We've seen this occur several times in the past, and it will happen again in the future. In 1815 BCE, Shamsi-Adad decided to make his move. Breaking the treaty, one that he thought was unfair anyway, he attacked the forces of Marduk-Balassu-Ikbi that were stationed in the regions northeast of the Tigris. At one of the fortresses in the area, he caught up with and captured the Babylonian king and brought him as his prisoner to the Assyrian capital of Nineveh. Around a year later, in 814 BCE, Shamsi-Adad fought and defeated Marduk-Balusi's successor, Babu-Ahu-Iddin, removing him from power. This left a sort of power vacuum as Babylonia was left without a king of their own for several years, leaving the country in a state of disarray. Now, as you might conclude, this is probably what the Assyrians wanted for the time being anyway. Just as he was starting to gain some momentum in his military campaigns, Shamsi-Adad died in 811 BCE. However, his son and successor, the future Adad-nirari III, was still just a boy and too young to rule. As we've seen, peaceful transitions of power in ancient Assyria generally had mixed odds. With the boy king coming to the throne, a betting man would likely place a wager against the success of the new king. This time though, the deck was stacked in favor of Adad-nirari due to his mother, a woman named Sammu-Rammat. The queen, not taking the throne herself, for this may have been considered sacrilege, ruled as regent until her son came of age. She must have been both a trusted confidant of the late king as well as an intelligent and capable woman to protect the authority of her house and son against the various field marshals and governors vying for greater power. She's mentioned along with her son Adad-nirari in several inscriptions and on a stele found in the Assyrian holy city and spiritual capital of Ashur. That in itself is pretty remarkable and shows just how high her status was within Assyrian society. Despite outward appearances, it's questionable though how much power both Sammu-Rammat and later her son, Adad-nirari III, actually had. It seems that the real power broker was perhaps another eunuch, a man named Nergal. Regardless of who was actually ruling Assyria at the time, the military was still in action and campaigning in all directions. During Adad-nirari's reign, Assyrian troops fought at least 13 campaigns in the Zagros mountains of western Iran between 809 and 789. They also fought a few in Syria as well. The southern border was also a zone of conflict with renewed pressure from Aramaic tribes, the most famous of which were called the Ituians, and who proved to be especially tough. In the year 787 BCE, Adad-nirari appointed as field marshal a man named Shamshi-ilu. His background is unknown, and it's possible that he was not even of Assyrian origin. However, he was extremely powerful, so much so that he held his office for over 40 years, outliving Adad-nirari III, who died in 783, and his successors, Shalmanesar IV and Ashur-Dan III. He may have even been around for Ashur-Dan III's successor, Ashur-nirari V, though this has not been confirmed. If true though, that would be 4 Assyrian kings whom he served. What's interesting is that the 3 kings after Adad-nirari III didn't leave many inscriptions. However, inscriptions abound with the name of Shamsi-ilu. In one of these, known as the Antakya stele from the reign of Adad-nirari III, Shamsi-ilu is mentioned alongside the king. However, later inscriptions and texts, especially during the reigns of Shalmanesar IV and Ashur-Dan III, omit the names of the kings and seem to give only Shamsi-ilu credit for several campaigns and buildings. As I believe was mentioned before, this is absolutely remarkable throughout Assyria's history, because only the deeds of kings were mentioned on a large stelae or important inscriptions. The fact that Shamsi-ilu's name was written in such ways is just like it's a total break with tradition, and it also shows the incredible amount of influence and prestige that he must have had. Now, Shamsi-ilu must have done something to earn that honor and prestige. As a military commander and field marshal, he was ruthless in every campaign he pursued. He shifted focus from the Zagros to Assyria's northern border with Urartu and fought several campaigns against them between 786 and 784. He fought with them again in the year 774 against a king known as Arjusi I and defeated him. This only gave him greater prestige as well as notoriety amongst Assyria's enemies. It probably also made him a bit arrogant because during the reign of the next king, Shalmanesar IV, not only did he continue to hold his position, but he also felt no compunction whatsoever to give the king, the actual king and official ruler of Assyria, any credit for the battles that were won. He would call himself the governor of Hatti and Gutium, meaning that his sphere of influence stretched quite far between the eastern and western parts of the empire. So you might be thinking, if Shamsi-ilu was such a successful battle commander and held sway over large portions of the Assyrian army, and he wasn't even acknowledging the king, at least not in public pronouncements, then why didn't he just crown himself king of all of Assyria? Why didn't he lead a coup? Well, that might have been due to a check on his power from the other magnates, most notably the palace herald, Bel-Haran Belu Usar. In a stele discovered at a site called Tel Abta near the Iraqi city of Sinjar, Bel-Haran Belu Usar claims that he established a city after himself called Dur Bel-Haran Belu Usar. As you can imagine, with his name in the title, this is a city named after himself. Not only this, but he also claims that he established tax exemptions for its people, and not the king. It almost looks as if he was creating a power base and trying to woo supporters for himself to plot some sort of coup, or at least a challenge to the power and influence of the other magnates throughout the empire. I sometimes think of these magnates as the Roman triumvirate that was made up of Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, just how powerful they were within Roman society, and how they also commanded their own armies. I think this was actually very similar to what was going on in ancient Assyria during this time. In the end, Shamsi-ilu seems to have come out on top. Now, we don't know what exactly happened to Bel-Haran Belu Usar, but we do know that, at least according to Assyrian records and inscriptions that were contemporary to the time, that by the reign of Ashur-Dan III, Shamsi-ilu is mentioned quite a bit along with several provincial governors. However, mention of the chief cupbearer, the palace herald, and other officials is absent. This indicates that Shamsi-ilu may have had these traditionally powerful individuals sidelined or reduced their relevance in government affairs. It seems, though, that there were those in Assyrian society who were growing very wary of Shamsi-ilu's amassing of power. In 763 BCE, several Assyrian cities, including Ashur, revolted against his policies and what they saw as his illegitimate use of power. It's highly likely that these revolts were started either by factions supporting rival magnates or by more traditionally minded Assyrian royalists who, often for religious reasons, supported the old power structure of a strong king. After several years and much bloodshed, Shamsi-ilu finally defeated the last of the rebels in 758. However, peace didn't last long because the next year, famine struck both the Assyrian Heartland and other important grain-producing areas of the empire. Due to this, the Assyrian army didn't campaign during the years 757 and 756. In 755, a new king, Adad-nirari V, became the ruler, and his ascension to the throne seems to have been a stabilizing influence to what had up until then been a dire situation for Assyria. It also seems as if there was a turn back to the older guard, as the chief cupbearer, the palace herald, and others who were traditionally vital parts of the Assyrian government returned to, or at least were mentioned again, in the Assyrian chronicles and records. This doesn't mean, though, that the Assyrian king's power was on the rise versus the many magnates. On the contrary, it was likely on the wane. In 754 or 753 BCE, the Urartian king Saduri II won an important battle against Assyria that may have crippled the main part of the Assyrian army to campaign for quite some time. This is because no further Assyrian campaigns are mentioned in various chronicles between the years 753 to 750, as well as during the year 747 BCE. It looks like the army just stayed put. Remember, in older times, it was considered almost a religious duty for the Assyrian king to lead his troops into battle. The fact that this didn't happen for 3 years straight might indicate that either the king was unable to lead the troops into battle given problems on the home front, or simply unwilling to do so. Assyrian kings also used to brag about their many campaigns and erected huge monuments to make sure that everyone knew about them. For example, we saw this in the Black Obelisk of Shalmanesar III. Ashur-Nirari III, though, doesn't have any such inscriptions to his name. Instead, we have a bunch of inscriptions written by various governors, some of whom, such as those of the cities of Mari and Suhi, seem to have been operating independently of the king. Sometime between the years 752 and 745 BCE, Shamsi-ilu died, though we don't know exactly how. However, a great revolt broke out in the Assyrian capital of Kalhu, aka Kala, also known as Nimrud. The various Assyrian chronicles also don't seem to indicate what exactly was the cause of the revolt, but it seems that in this, King Ashur-Nirari III may have been killed and his brother ascended to the throne. The birth name of this brother was Palu, but he took the name Tiglath-Pileser III. He also changed the face of Assyrian politics once and for all, and ushered in an entirely new era for Assyria. But more on him in the next episode. Thank you so much for stopping by the channel, I really appreciate it. If you thought this video was useful, please hit that like button because it helps the channel out a lot. Thanks again, and until next time.